This is All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. Thank you for joining us for part of your day. We'll continue now with another conversation about an Oscar-nominated film. In the documentary film, The Perfect Neighbor, the story of a fatal shooting is told entirely through police body camera footage. Ajaka Owens was a mother living with her kids in a tight-knit community in Ocala, Florida. Also living nearby was a woman named Susan Lawrence. Lawrence really did not like the sounds of kids playing in an empty lot near her home, or really anything else the kids did. Lawrence made multiple complaints to the police, and the police told her there was nothing they could do if the kids weren't trespassing. Lawrence kept calling and calling the police, and sometimes lying. The kids were mostly black, and Lawrence was a white woman. It all changed one night in 2023. Owens went to Lawrence's house after an altercation with the kids. Lawrence shot her through a locked door. Owens died. Lawrence claims she felt her life was in danger using the stand your ground defense. The story of how a neighborhood's tensions boiled over to violence is told by director Geeta Gandbhir. She won a directing award for the film at Sundance, and now it's nominated for the Best Documentary Feature at this year's Academy Awards. When she joined us to talk about the film, I started by asking Geeta about the personal connection she had with the family at the center of the film, the Owens family.
Ajaka Owens was a dear friend of two relatives of mine, Takima Robinson, who is an executive producer on the film, and Kimberly Robinson Jones. Kimberly lived in the community where Ajaka lived, and she was actually the person who directed Ajaka to that street. Kimberly used to live in the house that Ajaka was living in when the confrontations with Susan started. And she believed that community was perfect for Ajaka and her young children. Again, an idyllic street with close-knit neighbors and children, again, playing freely and watched over by the whole community.
When you put on your documentary filmmaker hat, how did you think about navigating your own position with the point of view while making a documentary?
So what's really interesting is that we initially didn't start out thinking that we were going to make a documentary. As soon as Ajaka was murdered, we sprang into action to support the family and to really activate around the media, because we were not sure if Susan Lawrence would walk from what she had done. She was not arrested for 4 days, and we wanted to help get the news out into the media, being that we ourselves work in the media, and to try to keep the case alive, even after Susan's arrest. But basically 2 months after the incident, we got our hands on the police body camera footage, along with a lot of other files. There was cell phone footage, there was ring camera footage, dash cam footage, detective interviews that happened after the incident, as well as 911 calls. And all of that came to us through the family lawyers. Basically, they had used the Freedom of Information Act and gotten the police department, the Marion County Sheriff's Department, I should say, to release any of the files that pertain to the case. So that material was sent to us, and we were asked to look through it to see if there was anything that would be useful for the news. But when it came to us in a jumble, and I used to be an editor, so I spent a couple of weeks stringing it out into a timeline. It was really challenging to do because there was no true organization to it, and sort of figuring out the chronology. But it was both detective work and grief work for me. It was a way to process. And once I had it strung out in a timeline, we realized that the material went back 2 years. And this is something we never see. And when there is a crime, we often only see the direct aftermath. Particularly with gun violence, you might see, which happens unfortunately every week, we see the grieving family, we see the funeral, but you don't get to see the lead up. And for us, that's when we realized there might be a bigger story here, and possibly a film.
When you looked at all of this footage, what was something that surprised you when you saw it?
I think what was incredible to me about the footage was how immersive it was. Again, this is footage that was never meant to be used for the purpose we are using it for. But what was so astonishing was how we got to see the community as they were before. Again, the police came into the community multiple times, and some of the calls that they were on lasted for an hour, some 2 hours, some longer. And we got to see this beautiful community living together, taking care of each other, a really tight social network. And again, it's a diverse community that we got to see the children playing freely in the street, just being themselves. Because we were not on the ground, right, with a camera being intrusive, directing anything. Again, they are, of course, they're interacting with the police, but they feel, in a way, because the camera is so innocuous, the body camera for the police, they often are being themselves fully. And we really wanted to paint a picture with this footage of this community. Again, oftentimes when crimes happen to us as people of color, we are criminalized, or somehow there's a question of how was this our fault, right? And so with this footage, we wanted to be able to paint a picture of this community as they were. And the children, again, you cannot adultify them in this footage. They are definitely children. And how that was all disrupted ultimately by one person and their access to a gun.
My guest is director Geeta Gandbhir. We're discussing her new documentary, The Perfect Neighbor, about a neighborhood dispute turned fatal. What do we know about Susan Lawrence and her life before the shooting?
So honestly, not much. Susan told many stories about her life, but as far as being able to fact check them, there were certain things we could. She was a member of her church. There were, again, perhaps the places she lived, but the rest of it was not something that honestly that the material got into, that we were given that much, nor was it something, to be honest, that we thought was that relevant to the situation, because ultimately it was about her behavior in the current situation and what it led up to.
It was very interesting just to, like you said, you get to watch her before this all happens, and she's sort of just obsessed about the kids in the neighborhood and playing on the lot and what they do with their dogs and just everything to do with the kids. She goes down to the police station to report something she has no evidence for. What do you make of her determination to keep filing these reports?
I think Susan tried to weaponize her race and privilege against the community. I think she was absolutely irritated by the noise that the children make. And I'm not going to say that children are not noisy. I used to live next to a high school and I will say, and I loved them, but they were noisy. But I think that's just a factor that you have to take into consideration when you move into the neighborhood. It's what's interesting is there's the police eventually tire of her. Right?
It is interesting. They truly get tired of getting calls from her.
They do,
because again,
there is no criminal justification for her calls. And I think one of them says to the other in one of the conversations, there's a certain point where you have to just, come to terms with the fact that you live around a bunch of kids, and I want to point out that the yard they were playing in, which was next door to Susan's house, belonged to Susan's neighbor, and they had permission to be there. So there was actually a father who lived in that house whose child is one of the children who ran around the neighborhood playing football, playing games with the other kids, and he would coach football games with them on his own lawn. So really, Susan taking up issue with the children seems very misguided. If anything, maybe you talk to the adult next door, right, who's hosting these kids. But her sort of rage at children who, as you can see in the footage, are mostly under 12, seems incredibly misplaced and frankly strange.
It's interesting. It's a diverse community. Many of the kids on the street are Black. There's white families as well. Susan is white. And it's interesting. Well, it's expected, frankly. Susan admits calling her neighborhoods the N-word. Were you surprised to just see her say, yeah, I said it on tape?
By the time she admitted to it, and it was during her interrogation that comes up with the two detectives who she had been at least brought in and then She was being questioned, I believe, for a second time. At that point, frankly, she had already shot Ajaka through a locked door, so nothing surprised me. And we also heard from the neighbors about the ways that she would abuse the children, using hate speech against them. The children said it themselves, but the children are so polite, they don't say the words. They say she calls us the R word, the P word. To this day, I don't know what the P word is, but they, the children spell out the curses. She called me a Jack ASS. They are incredibly polite to anyone who questions them, and respectful in that way. So I would say that no, at that point, I feel like we'd already seen who Susan was, so it didn't surprise me that much.
Final question. In one of the most devastating moments of the film, we see the children being told that their mother is not going to come home from the hospital. Why did you decide to show it? Yeah, why did you decide to show that?
Sure. So when we went to Pamela Dias, who's Ajaka's mother, at the beginning of this, when I realized there was a film, I first asked her, did she want me to make her a film? I have no other skills between us. I had nothing else to offer her. So that is, that's what I knew how to do. And I believed we could do with the material we had. I asked her if she wanted me to do this and if it was too painful and if she wanted to move on. And she said, no, I want you to do it. And she takes a lot of strength from Mamie Till, Emmett Till's mother, who had an open casket funeral for her son who was lynched because she wanted the world to know what happened to her baby. And she invited reporters in and had them take pictures, which were shared again around the world. She believed that bearing witness was critical to making change. And Pamela is of the same mindset. And we talked about the fact that there are really painful things in the footage. There's terrible, heartbreaking imagery. And she said, no, keep it in. The world needs to know. That's the only way that we can maybe motivate change. And I would say we also talk about the video of George Floyd that circulated around the world and created a groundswell and a movement. Her hope is that Ajaka's death can mean something, that it won't be in vain, and that by asking the audiences to bear witness with us and share in the grief, that they will also be called to take action.
Yeah. That was my conversation with director Geeta Gandbhir. Her film, The Perfect Neighbor, has been nominated for Best Documentary Feature at this year's Academy Awards. Coming up, Ethan Hawke will talk about his role as Lawrence Hart in the film Blue Moon, which turns a magnifying glass onto the songwriter's professional and artistic breakup with Richard Rodgers. The role landed Hawke a Best Actor nomination at this year's Oscars. Stay tuned to hear him talk about it. This is all of it.